Welcome to Early Music Underground and our Fireside Chat series. I'm Danae Ashley, and this evening we are chatting with Henry Lebedinsky, founder and director of Early Music Underground. So Henry, how did you discover early music?
Well, it's a bit of a roundabout story. When I was growing up, my family went to the symphony regularly, and I was really exposed to mainstream classical music, and I liked it. I was very intrigued and interested. And when I was about 8, 9 years old, I discovered Bach, and I discovered the recordings of Glenn Gould, and I was hooked. By the time I first heard a harpsichord, I realized that this is the sound that I really wanted to have in my life. So when I was 14 years old, I bought my first harpsichord, and I really got hooked. I got hooked on the sound. I got hooked on the rhetoric, the idea of music just speaking clearly and having something to say. I wanted to be able to play music in a way that spoke. Once I got hooked, I never looked back.
It sounds like you really were hooked at 14, getting your own harpsichord. Do you play the harpsichord and any other instruments?
Historical keyboards, so harpsichord, organ, early piano, and clavichord.
And can you explain to our audience what the clavichord is?
The clavichord is one of the older keyboard instruments. It's a very simple keyboard where the key has on the far end a little brass tangent. When you push down the lever, the tangent hits the string and remains in contact with it. So it's very intimate, very quiet, and very expressive.
So it's a softer sound than the harpsichord.
Right. It was designed for small rooms.
Okay, like this one.
Yeah, like this one, with the audience of being the person at the instrument and then the people around. It was a teaching instrument as well as a very, very easy, cheap, affordable, and easy to maintain keyboard instrument, so you could have multiple clavichords in your house, so that if you have 4 children all learning how to play, the kids could be working in different rooms and you wouldn't have a clatter throughout the house.
Wow. So for those of us that are new to this realm, can you just say a little bit more about the difference between the clavichord, the harpsichord, and our modern day piano, if you don't mind?
So the clavichord strikes the strings from underneath and
Right.
remains in contact with the strings. The harpsichord, like a guitar, has a quill that plucks the string and lets the string vibrate, and when the jack comes back down, it damps the string, whereas a piano comes from underneath, has a hammer that hits the string, comes back down, and lets the string vibrate.
Okay.
So it's touch, pluck, hammer.
That could be an album title.
That's right, touch, pluck, and hammer. I like it. There's a band name in there somewhere.
Exactly. Exactly. And speaking of bands, let's talk a little bit about your Early Music Underground. What exactly is this? Is this a band or is it a movement? What is it as its founder?
It's all of the above. The organization performs several functions. First of all, as a concert presenter, it puts on events in different venues, collaborates with other hosts and presenters to put on early music concerts. At the same time as we curate a body of musicians to say, if somebody is looking for a house concert, or if somebody is looking for musicians to play at a wine tasting or a scotch tasting or a beer tasting, we can organize themed programs for you and give you musicians. So we present, we host, and we contract at the same time.
Wow. And so why in the title, it's obviously early music, why underground? Why add that?
Well, this, like most things, this goes back to my childhood. I remember, before I really discovered early music, I just remember the discomfort of having to be a classical music audience member. As a child, I didn't really connect with that formality of having to sit quietly in a chair and listen without motion. There was such a wall, there was such a disconnect between the audience and the performers. When I discovered early music, those boundaries were loosened, but still there was this feeling of the musicians being on one side, the audience being on the other side, and the audience sit down, shut up, and listen and enjoy it, appreciate it, and the musicians do a wonderful job of communicating. Right? In early music, there's that flexibility of improvisation and just a much looser and much more attitude of just having more fun, it seems, on the performer side of things, but there was still that barrier between the audience and the musicians. And so I came up with the idea of underground, thinking more in terms of indie rock, of folk music performance, saying, okay, can we capture the energy, the intimacy, the informality of all of these other genres, and can we translate them to Baroque music? Because the music speaks for itself, but I don't think that we are given as musicians the opportunity to perform and interact with audiences in that same spirited way as rock bands, as folk bands do. So I said, how can I, in Seattle and in the Pacific Northwest, how can I find those venues, those opportunities for great musicians to communicate great music, but in a way that engages the audience, new audiences, and established audiences in completely different ways?
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And I want to go back to something that you said. It caught my attention. You said that there's improvisation. And for those of us that are not in the know about early music, when I hear the word improvisation, I often think of jazz. I don't think of classical music as improvisation. I think of classical music and early music as what you were describing earlier about, sit down, shut up, enjoy the ride, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about the improvisation. When I'm a new listener, what am I hearing that's improvised?
Well, first of all, a lot of mainstream classical music, and this really was all the way through the 19th century, right into the 20th century. A lot of what we think of as the most formal of classical music, that is Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, there was an improvisatory element in that music too. Although the composer gave a lot of direction on the paper, performers still improvised. Performers still took a lot of liberty and made the music their own. It was really only in the 20th century and in the later 20th century where things got really stiff. I remember my violin teacher, bless his heart, he always told me, right, in your composition lessons, you make up the music. Here, you play what's on the page. And I think that was some of the worst advice I ever got as a musician. And the thing that really links Baroque music and jazz, and really, it should link all music, is the idea that the musician is up there interpreting, making that music in the moment, right now. And like jazz, there's a lot of flexibility in Baroque music, both in the idea of ornamenting, that is, embellishing what's on the page. Right? Oftentimes, especially in 17th century music, you're not given a lot of cues. You're given maybe a very unornamented, a very simple line. And it's up to you to add embellishments and actually recompose, make the music your own on the spot. Use your skills, your technique to make the music come alive in the moment.
So it was expected, by those early composers.
Absolutely. And not only that, we have evidence. We have, for example, Arcangelo Corelli, the great Roman violinist. We have slow movements of Corelli where he's actually written down as teaching methods a variety of embellishments as an example of what you could possibly do. And we have other composers from the time writing down what they heard other people play. So there is an actual existing tradition of showing exactly what composers did back then. And the beauty of the modern historical performance movement, that is from the 1950s, 1960s onward, is this freedom to say, yeah, you know what? There is more than one way to play this. And each time you play it, you can play it differently, right? You get up there on stage and say, yeah, this is my music, and this is my performance, and I'm going to make it happen now in a way that I move to do it that's going to be completely different from the way I did it yesterday or the way I'm going to do it at the next concert. That freedom is amazing, and it just totally removes any concept of orthodoxy, of this hamstringing of musical culture that I find so prevalent in modern classical music. And as the historical performance movement ages, it's creeping insidiously into Baroque performance practice. I say no. I say forget about it. Right? Let's make this like rock music. Right? Let's take it seriously. Let's work hard. Let's practice hard. Let's be serious about our interpretations. But let's have fun.
Yeah.
Right.
It sounds fun. The audience can't feel the energy that I feel from you, but there's a lot of energy around this. And I want to also, I heard another word that I wanted to unpack a little bit for our viewers. The word tradition. And I know that you also play traditional Celtic music, and you've talked a little bit in other venues about the tradition, how it's alive, and that you also work as a church musician and talk about how the tradition is also alive. Can you explain a little bit on those three streams, how tradition is alive? I mean, with the Irish music in church, and then also with the early music. I mean, are there composers now that are writing in the style of the early music, or is it, what do you mean by tradition being alive?
There are some composers that will write neo-Baroque music, but it's more on the interpretation side. I think especially in American music, we have this artificial dichotomy where tradition somehow means old, and its antithesis being contemporary somehow being new. But of course, contemporary is a moving target. New gets old very quickly. We think about modern music from the 1950s and modern music from the 1960s and modern music from the 1780s. There's always been somebody complaining about modern music and how nobody likes it and nobody will listen to it. The idea of tradition simply means that it is built layer on layer upon the knowledge of the previous generations. With historical performance, we actually have to leapfrog a bit and say, all right, there were many treatises written on how to perform music and the aesthetics of performing music written in the 17th and 18th century. So if we're trying to recreate, or at least attempt to recreate this music, we have to acknowledge the performance practice of the past, and that's what historical performance is all about. But at the same time, there were no recordings. Right? We can't just burn a disc of music that was performed in 1700. So we're making assumptions. We're ultimately making new music, and the historical performance revival is really only about 60 years old. So we have a living tradition of about 60 years going back as iconoclastic performers, saying, all right, we're not just playing something the way my teacher did it, or the way I heard it on this recording. We're really creating something new. And as performers of early music, we have to constantly fight the establishment of an orthodoxy, saying, yeah, well, I heard this recording made in 1980, and I want to play it just like this great violinist or this great keyboardist. We have to constantly fight against establishing orthodoxies. So the tradition is alive. We're making something new every time we come and play together, and that's something that has really been informed by my work with Celtic music. That vitality, that spirit, but at the same time, the idea of crafting something new every time we play together. It's invigorating. And I hope that translates to audiences, because when I play Irish traditional music, I see the energy in the audience. And every time I'm up there with a guitar in my hands, I think to myself, all right, 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be performing on stage with an early music ensemble sitting at the harpsichord. How can I capture that same energy? How can I build into the audience that energy that I got on stage as a Celtic musician? Or every time I hear a singer-songwriter on stage and see that just intimate connection between the artist and the audience, how can we make that happen in early music, in classical music? And early music underground, I think this is my attempt to get others to work with me to answer that question. And I'm bringing musicians that I work with in those folk elements that do cross over. And I'm bringing them with me, and I'm saying, let's do this. Let's make Baroque music as vital as what we like to think of as contemporary music. Let's cross that divide, because I think the audience will come with us.
And what I think is really wonderful about how you're describing this, it translates to this movement in humanity in general of how there's the mindfulness movement. Let's be present to this moment, right here, right now, recognizing our breath, recognizing who we are, what we're doing, just being. And what you're saying about being with the audience in that moment, and this is the only time that music is ever going to be made this particular way at this particular time, I think really speaks to something very deep that people are craving. not being mindless and just, you know, being passive in their listening, but really engaging and being present to the moment. And so what I'm hearing is that early music underground is coming to where the people are so that they can participate in this mindfulness and in being co-creators of something that is never going to be co-created again. It's, you know, the next time it will be completely different. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about who your target audience is for this.
Well, I think anyone in the arts has noticed a graying of audiences, and what I'm trying to find is a balance between offering music that appeals to audiences of all ages and the core audience of classical and early music, but at the same time just trying to introduce new ears to the style of music. Like you said, it's something that is extremely in the moment, but at the same time, I think changing culture, changing audience habits, and also a situation where just a lot of the younger generation has no exposure to art music whatsoever, no matter when it was written or how it's performed. What Early Music Underground seeks to do is provide a completely different social context. No more can we just count on people to come to the concert hall, sit down, shut up, and hear the music. What we're offering, and a number of other groups are doing this because, again, it's a question of our survival. Right? We're offering experiences. Whether it's a concert in a brewery, or a distillery, or a restaurant, or a church, we're offering a social dynamic, saying, come experience the music, come have some wine, have some food, have refreshment, have company, have a social experience. And at the same time, we're not just going to play at you, we are going to give you the tools to fully enter into the music. Whether it's the context for what the music was written, explanation of what's going on, very clear translations if the music is another language. I want to be able to give you an all-access pass to what we as musicians take for granted. I notice that particularly I do a lot of work with sacred music, and I work so much with Latin that I can look at a Latin text and I hear this Latin as a living language. But if you don't speak Latin, or you don't speak Italian or French or German or Russian, whatever the language the music is in, it's my job as a presenter and a producer to say, all right, I need to give you the tools to enter into the language of the vocal music, and also into the idiom, because again, so many people today are only exposed to music that comes in 4-minute long packages we call songs, with a steady beat with drums and percussion and guitar. If it doesn't fall into that category, it's not music. And we have, in essence, created an audience that oftentimes can't respond to music outside those comfortable boundaries. So what Early Music Underground is out to do is say, okay, we're going to give you a social context. We're going to say, all right, you want to have a great experience with your friends at a wine tasting? Come to a wine tasting of Italian wines, and here's some Italian Baroque music. Because the Baroque music, it has the fire of bluegrass. It has the soul of rhythm and blues. Right? It has the intellectual depth of classical music. Right? But I can't count on you to come hear that just by going to a concert hall. So we're going to get you in with the social context, with the beer, with the scotch, with the wine, I don't care, with the company. Come with your friends. If you're a musician and you have great friends that love to try new things but have not had that art exposure, come with us. We're going to come to this brewery, or we're going to come to this tasting and have an early music experience. And you know, you might just like it. Right? But we'll give you those entry points, multiple levels of entry, and the rest is up to just hard listening. Enter into the moment.
So you're saying that the audience needs to come in with some thoughtfulness, is what I'm hearing, around what you're doing, and be able to enjoy the music for its beauty, but also perhaps think a little bit more about your live liner notes, I guess you would say, if you're describing. I think what's interesting about early music is a lot of these composers are very interesting people that would be on tabloids today. You know, they'd be on the front page.
These people would be in jail today.
Yeah, that's true too. Right.
It's what I call hard listening.
Yeah.
You know,
okay.
and not
say more
in,
about that.
and not in the sense of difficult listening, but just, there's a little bit of this, there's a little bit of contact sport here, right? So much popular music, you can have a lazy ear. You can tune out. The beat's the same, right? You know what to expect. With classical music in general, I think of Baroque music as a sports car, where classical music can often be a Cadillac. There are sharp turns, there are abrupt lane changes. It's fun driving, right? It's an adventure. But it does require that kind of hard listening. You need to get in there, right, and use your brain. Don't be afraid to use your brain when you approach music. So there is that little bit of okay, we expect a little bit more from our audience than you would at a rock concert, right? The rhythm's more interesting, more complex sometimes. The instruments are softer. It's not all so homogeneous and repetitive. So we ask a little bit more of you. But the reward is so great because you can actually get into this experience. You can catch that energy from the musicians, just like you do at a rock concert, at a folk concert, right? But it does require you to put some effort into it. So we ask a little bit of you, but we promise we'll give you something in return.
Right. So what do you, aside from that, what do you hope people will take away from any early music underground event that you put on?
I think the spirit, the fun of the music. Our programs are always themed. We always have something to offer, whether it's a beer-themed program, or a Scotch-themed program, or a German-themed program, or French, or Valentine's Day, like we have an upcoming concert about music for and against Valentine's Day, right? So there's always a bit of humor. But I think the most important message is one of adventure. Right? I think we can get lazy. We can get complacent. We treat music as background, as the soundtrack of our lives. But I think the idea of hard listening embodies this idea of just come, take a chance, do something different. You want adventure? Here's an adventure. We're going to give you something you like, right? If it's great food, great company, great drink, but enter into this world. There's such an emotional journey here. It's like great literature, right? It requires you to sit down and open the book. We're not going to show you the movie. We're going to ask you to open the book. But it's going to be a fun read.
Right.
Right? But you have to be willing to open the pages. And once you're hooked, I'm hooked on this stuff. I can't live without it. Right?
Yeah, we can feel that passion.
I'm hooked on this. You can be too, right? But you have to open the book. Right? You have to buy the book and open the book.
And in today's culture, we are very open, especially in this area of Seattle, in the Pacific Northwest, of being open to innovation and something new and trying on something that you haven't tried before, which is exciting, I think is exciting for this group. I'm curious to know if you would say a little bit about the musicians that are participating in this movement. Are they? How did you put them together? How are they auditioning? I've noticed that the age range seems to skew younger, probably 40 and younger. Just curious about the musicians that are participating.
Yeah,
or does it matter?
I'm not really trying to skew young. What I'm looking for are people that are willing to be a little iconoclastic, that play rhetorically, that are looking to really communicate their energy and their passion for the music with audiences. I'm looking to engage the best local players, the people that have not only the technique and the talent, but just the drive to communicate, and the drive to share, and the drive to put that kind of rock concert energy into early music. But we're also bringing in some great artists from across the country. The great Baroque violinist and Celtic fiddler Michael Albert, all the way from Portland, Maine. We have Reginald Mobley, who's one of the finest countertenors of his generation. He's coming in to do this Bach program in February. A man who has just wowed audiences, because what he does is he just takes that music and sends it out there with so much feeling. I mean, you have to be dead, right, or on some serious drugs, not to really
Which
feel
could
this
be
guy's.
possible here.
That's very true. That's very true. You have to really try very hard not to really feel the passion and the beauty of some of these voices and instruments. I want to put together musicians that enjoy working together. This is a collaborative process. There's no room for attitude, and there's no room for a diva personality here. This is all about getting together and building new audiences. Right? If people are not willing to get out there off the stage and interact and ask questions from the audiences and answer questions that the audience might have, really show that we're in this together, that this is really a two-sided process. It can't just be musician, it can't just be audience, it's the collaboration of the two. And these are the folks that I'm looking for, people from around the corner and around the country that are willing to really work together to bring new people to this art form, right? Just by doing it and doing it really, really well in some very different places.
It sounds fun, and it sounds exciting, and the energy is definitely rising. Do you, as we close our evening fireside chat, do you have any last words that you'd like to let our viewers know about Early Music Underground? Last thoughts?
Hang on. Hang on, join us, come along for the ride. You know, make this a journey that you'll be happy to share with friends. Because that's the way it works. It's all about community. It's building community through great music, right? There's no boundary. There's no wall. And this is about really coming and making music together. Artists and audience making music together and having a great time.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Henry, for being with us. And you can find the next events on the website. Is that correct?
EMUSeattle.com.
Great. Thank you very much. And that's our fireside chat for this evening. This is Early Music Underground.